Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War news update for the 30th of October 2023, the second part thereof. And go and check out my first part if you haven't already seen it. Let's get to, actually before we go to military aid, a few Darth Putin quotes here on the screen for you. I love a bit of Darth Putin, always good value. We'll pop in to see some more details of the possible destruction or at least damaging of an S-400 air defense complex in Crimea by the ATACMS strike this morning, last night. Ukrainian Strategic Command said this night the armed forces successfully hit a strategic object of the air defense system in the temporarily occupied Crimea, says Osint Yuri. Also, on October the 25th, the armed forces destroyed the S-400 strategic air defense system near the temporarily occupied Luhansk. Russian sources say that this night a rocket attack was carried out on the deployment point of the anti-aircraft missile regiment of the Russian air defense forces in Crimea. 17 enemy soldiers, or 17 Russians, were wounded. 5 pieces of equipment were damaged. Okay, the opinion of this source, Osint Yuri, is that the strike was planned and executed over a 3-day period in which the Ukrainians flew decoy drones towards Yevpatoria and Saki in a wild weasel. So that's where you try and bait out attacks on you. It can be quite dangerous if you're doing it in a plane, but obviously with drones it's less dangerous to human life. But wild weasel operations so that other Ukrainian ground and air assets could pinpoint the location of Russian air defenses in the region. It's also another strike on the Russian S-400 complex since they began using their A-50 AWACS to coordinate long-range SAM strikes against Ukrainian aircraft. And if true, this is the second time ATACMS has defeated the S-400 in a head-to-head matchup. And you can see a perspective location of the ATACMS launches near Kherson to be able to reach just into Crimea there. There are these rumors that Russia are able to hit Ukrainian aircraft at a longer distance because they're using their AWACS plane to relay data, radar data, back to the surface to air missile systems so that they can have a longer range. It's not so much the range of their missiles, but it's the range of their own radar systems that are holding them back in realizing their full potential, these S-400s. But if they have access to the AWACS aircraft, then they can get eyes in the sky and reach their full potential. This is what Ukrainian forces are able to do in employing the Link 17, which is a system that kind of integrates all the radars into one command and control. And so Ukrainian air defenses in principle can, and their airplanes can identify targets at a much greater range, and also just all over the country, really. It's just joins everything up together. Anyway, let's move on to military aid. And talking about air defense systems, we have lots of talk at the moment about Frankensteins. These are the US and Ukrainian joint collaboration in creating something new, some hybrid air defense systems. As Ukraine has almost run out of Buk missiles, engineers from both Ukraine and the US, as I've mentioned many times before, have adapted Soviet-era radar and launchers to be able to fire Sea Sparrow, RIM-7 and Sidewinder AIM-9 missiles, both of which are available in great quantity. It works. Well, let's actually have a little look at those missiles. So both of these missiles are basically medium-range missiles. The RIM-7 Sea Sparrow, it was originally designed as an anti-missile fired from a ship. So basically, if an anti-ship missile was coming in, the RIM-7 would go up and hit that. It's got a operational range of about 19 kilometers, so 10 miles. It's not huge, right? So it's not going to be your 100-kilometer range. It's not a long-range missile. It's very much a sort of short to medium. And for the AIM-9, which is a air-to-air missile normally, but being fired from the ground here, it will be ground-to-air. In its normal function, it would have an operational range of 1 to 35 kilometers, or basically 1 to 22 miles. Whether these are being adapted at all, whether it's the AIM-9X, which is a slightly different variant. Where are you? You're down here. So the AIM-9X Sidewinder is one that I think can be fired from the ground, from NASAMS platforms. The AIM-9X has been tested for a surface attack capability with mixed results, it says there. But I think later on in this article, it talks about it being used in NASAMS and whatnot. So, yeah, AIM-9X. Yep. Here we have. No, it's not there. I'm fairly sure. Yes, here it is. Sorry. In May 2019, the AIM-9X Block 2 was test fired from the National Advanced Surface-to-Air Missile System, NASAMS, which we know Ukraine have a number of at the Andøya Space Center in Norway. So that's the Norwegian-American collaboration, the NASAMS. So possibly, the AIM-9X is what is being used. Starting late 2022, US has tried to adapt the AIM-9M Sidewinders to surface-to-air missile system, part of a wider program known as Frankensam. On October the 24th, a Ukrainian official said those AIM-9 missiles were out of operation. We found a way of launching them from the ground, Sidewinders from the ground. It's a kind of self-made air defense. So that appears to be what they are doing. And as I say, there's quite a lot of talk about these. As P-Star-11 here says, air defense based on the Book air defense system with the integration of RIM-7 missiles is already in Ukraine. Several installations are already in Ukraine. In total, the armed forces of Ukraine plan to modernize 17 launchers. However, the American military industrial complex is capable of converting only 5 installations per month, she said. Range is about 20 kilometers reportedly. So we'll have to watch out for that one. That's great to be able to upgrade these Book launchers that don't have the ammunition anymore. There are plenty of RIM-7 and AIM-9 Sidewinders to be able to use, though. Internal Affairs Services of Latvia will hand over 12 drones to the Ukrainian police. Now, you might think 12 drones isn't very much, but drones come in such a variety of capabilities. You don't know whether these are really capable drones that are worth a lot of money each, rather than the cheap, first-person view drones that are essentially 10 a penny, 1,500 of them being sent to the front line in one fell swoop. It's difficult to know without any further details. The quote here is, earlier, the Minister of Internal Affairs, Richard Kozlovskis, met with the head of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Ukraine, Klimenko, in Lithuania to decide on that. So anyway, the Ukrainian police are getting some drones from Latvia there. Staying on drones, this is a drone I reported a number of times previously when they were handed out to Ukraine. The Kraken Special Forces are using these. These are the Black Hornet Nano reconnaissance drones. So these are tiny, like the size of a dragonfly, basically. Large dragonfly recon drones being used in operations complementing the skills and capabilities of the Kraken forces. Let's have a little look at that. If I can, it doesn't seem to, oh no, I'm pressing the wrong button. So what happens when your brain just stops working? So it's pretty cool. You can just put it on your belt. You've got some kind of belt contraption to fit the drone into. And those would be useful if you're clearing out houses, look around a corner, don't want to walk around a corner to find 5 Russian soldiers waiting to shoot you. You can send a drone like this around the corner or down into a basement, so on and so forth. Really useful for that kind of activity. Anyway, they are being used. Ukrainian rapid production facility for 3D printed drone deployed munitions. This is massively significant. It's not a case, it seems, anymore of having munitions being constructed outside of the country or the other end of Ukraine. You can actually take production facilities to the Ukrainians now with the evolution of 3D printing and the capabilities 3D printing can allow you. Most are modeled on the standard 82mm mortar shell, incorporating a significant amount of additional shrapnel. So that's what we see at the beginning of this video. Are the boxes of shrapnel, I presume. and they end up putting these into their munitions, which are, one assumes, constructed by 3D printing, and then they are using these, attaching them to their first-person view drones and dropping them on Russian targets. Now, as we come and look at the munitions further down the other end of the workshop here, they seem to come in all different shapes and sizes, depending on what their needs are, and colours even. Whether the colours denote different capabilities, I don't know, or whether it's just the 3D printing allows you to do lots of pretty colours for these incredibly dangerous and horrific weapons. But anyway, the Ukrainians having the capability to manufacture particularly shells like this, where we know that they are lacking in mortar bombs. These are built on the same, modelled on the same blueprint. I wonder if they could actually make mortar shells, or whether you really need. The thing about this is you can have plastic here to 3D printed plastic to drop these IDs. These IDs can be made of that, whereas mortar shells, mortar bombs really need to be made of metal, and I think you need a proper sort of manufacturing workshop to do that, rather than some 3D printing unit. Norway will give Ukraine modern equipment for hospitals and help with the treatment of Ukrainian soldiers. This is reported by the head of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, Ihor Klimenko. He added that the new agreements have appeared in the field of protection of Ukrainian energy infrastructure and humanitarian demining. Again, Norway coming up with the goods there for Ukraine, being a strong supporter of Ukraine continually. Now, Reuters here is one of many news outlets that have been reporting on this, which is the idea that the Ukrainian war has really boosted US defense contractors and defense contractors around the world. But when you have, and we'll talk about this in the geopolitical section, people like Mike Johnson actually starting to show his true colors. When you have many Americans thinking, well, why are we giving this money, all of this money, to Ukraine? And as I keep belaboring the point, it's not about charity. The US isn't just giving money, they're getting gains for this. They're getting geopolitical strategic gains, which are somewhat more abstract. You're talking about power, you're talking about influence in terms of the geopolitical landscape around the world. You're talking about communicating things to China with regard to Taiwan, all that kind of stuff. The US is getting a return on investment there, but also in terms of economics, they're getting a return on investment. And here we can see, and also their armed forces are getting much newer kit. So the capabilities of the US armed forces are increasing as they give older stuff to Ukraine and replace that with newer stuff. It's just a way of the US Army getting upgraded here. So Ukraine war orders starting to boost revenues for big US defense contractors. And you could argue this is all about the military industrial complex, and you could argue that that's one kind of sector that isn't the most, morally outstanding sector in any country's economy. But nonetheless, if you're talking about economics, this is hugely important. So during his latest request for $106 billion in new funds to Ukraine, Israel, and the Pacific region and border enforcement, US President Joe Biden on the 20th of October said some of the supplemental requests would go to companies to backfill production of US weapons sent abroad. Biden mentioned Patriot missiles made in Arizona and artillery shells manufactured in 12 states across the country, naming Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Texas. To be sure, executives from several defense firms at a recent trade show cautioned that a lack of skilled labor and supply chain issues continue to hamper companies' capacity to fill orders. So these companies are desperate for more labor. They are increasing production. They're employing more people, and they need the supply chain to catch up with the kind of the demand for production. Which you'd say, okay, that's a challenge, but it's a good challenge, right? This is to say that we need more people and we need more supply chains, which is we are going to spend our money on supply chains, which then those supply chains have their own supply chains that will spend their money. It's a money multiplier. And you increase your factory employment by whatever percent, all those people are going to be buying sandwiches in the local shop. They're going to be able to afford their mortgage. They're going to be able to afford to go out for meals with their families, etc., etc. Employment gives in tax revenues to the government, but it also is a money multiplier locally. And so it is really a significant economic stimulus this for wherever these companies, these corporations are based. Yes, you're going to have big wigs making gazillions off the back of this, and you have all the kind of corporate money making situations, but you've also got employees getting jobs and supply chains booming. So, quote, the supply chain, to be completely candid with you, remains, I think we expect to remain what I call fragile, General Dynamics Aiken said on the earnings call, as the company said it was cutting its forecast for 2023 business jet deliveries. Quote, I don't think that's going to get back to what we saw pre-pandemic for the foreseeable future. So there are still challenges, but as I say, these are good challenges. Lockheed on October the 17th said supply and labour disruptions are affecting divisions like aeronautics, which makes the advanced F-35 fighter jet due to the need for processor assemblies, solid rocket motors, castings and forgings. But yeah, you know, once those supply chains get sorted, then you are going to get production that increases. You're going to get more jobs, more money in these local areas, and that is one of the big benefits to the US assisting the Ukrainians here. And there is no such thing as a free lunch. The US will know this. They'll be scare quotes giving stuff to Ukraine, knowing that they will expect a return on investment for that assistance. You know, it is not charity. And I think that needs to be the US government, Biden administration has started doing that. But they needed to communicate that way earlier in this war, because there are still many Americans who are really dubious about the sums of money that are claimed to be going to Ukraine, and they think it's some kind of zero-sum game, as I keep saying, where it's not. It's a positive-sum game, a win-win situation. Russian MOD has received the first batch of the Plaston light-tracked armored vehicles for experimental exploitation. Interesting-looking vehicles, these. Know nothing about them, but it does indicate that Russia is still able to construct things. The vehicles are equipped with CRTs, and here you look at, guys, it's nice when vehicles look brand new and painted and not dirty and rusty. Although rust is not so relevant for CRTs, those are composite rubber tracks rather than using metal tracks. These things, I guess they're A, lighter, and B, maybe more durable in some ways. Anyway, there you go. These things are have been delivered to I guess do some experimentation on there. Right, moving on. Ramzan Kadyrov, the Chechnyan warlord, 170 Wagner PMC fighters have joined the elite Akhmat Chechen Special Forces, he says. At the time of Prigozhin's death, Wagner numbered between 25 and 30,000 men. Now Kadyrov is personally delighted that 170 of them have decided to join Akhmat. There's been this reasoning as to what the theorizing as to what the Wagner PMC troops would do, whether they would go and find themselves work in Africa, whether they would assimilate back into the armed forces, the Russian armed forces. But there was that division between Wagner and the conventional armed forces, with Prigozhin being very critical of the armed forces, so they don't particularly like each other. And then here we see some ending up back in I guess, you know, there are other PMCs they could join, but this is not quite a PMC, but it's not quite the Russian conventional forces. It's the Chechen Special Forces, which the Akhmat Special Forces unit is predominantly not Chechens, interestingly. So I guess that's a fairly safe home for them, maybe. And then looking at this is not to take the mickey or anything. Russian UAZ 390-94 Bukhanka with a counter drone screen. So this is the Scooby-Doo van, the Loaf Bukhanka van. I would prefer to drive something like this than one without. I've seen so many of these get destroyed as drones go in the front windscreen and in at the side and the back windscreen. Here at least there is some protection. These were laughed at, as I've said a number of times, these were laughed at the beginning of the conflict, and they were laughed at not because they didn't do a job against drones, because actually there weren't the drones around at the beginning of the conflict. They were laughed at because they were put on top of tanks in order to protect them, but these would really only be protection against RPGs, and the Ukrainians were using javelins and NLAWs, and those top-down attack munitions would basically made mincemeat out of such cope cages, and that's where the taking a piss out of these came from. Is just they were wholly inadequate for doing what they hoped they could do. But as the war went on, we've seen first-person view drones become more and more prevalent on the battlefield, and these cope cages have found that they are, soldiers have found that these are much more useful in trying to protect against first-person view loitering munitions. They don't always, but it is better than nothing. In fact, Constantine, who is often on Andrew Perpetua's live stream, has been doing fundraising recently to get big screens put all around things like self-propelled howitzers, and I think he's got a team making them. They've fundraised for 3 already. I know I've donated a bit to their cause. So these are being seen as much more useful now than they were at the beginning of the war. Right, I'm going to go on to talk about Mike Johnson, as I mentioned previously. So he is the GOP, the Republican Party Majority Speaker in the House of Representatives. For those who don't know American politics, you've got the Senate, which is 100 senators, two from each state around the country, and then you have many more representatives in the House of Representatives that operate, and they have a majority speaker and a minority speaker. At the moment, we've got Hakeem Jeffries is a minority speaker for the Democrats. The majority speaker, they were struggling to vote someone in because it wasn't getting through time and time again. Lots of people went for it, and eventually we got Mike Johnson. There's no more than 435 at any one time. I think at the moment it's 221 majorities, so that's GOP, 212 minority, that's Democrats, as far as I remember, but I could be wrong there. US House Speaker Mike Johnson to support defense funding for Israel, but not Ukraine. So I said that this was going to happen, and people were calling me out saying, I don't think you're interpreting Mike Johnson correctly here. Actually, he's shown his true colours, I think. US House Speaker Mike Johnson will support a standalone bill that includes defense funding for Ukraine, for Israel, but not for Ukraine, Johnson said in an interview with Fox News. I mean, this is bad news, but exactly what I was expecting. As Alexander Vindman says here, calling it, Speaker Johnson is serving the goals of America's enemies and playing the part of Putin's puppet. And this is him on Fox News.
What is your response, and have you spoken to the president about his request to tie the money together between Israel and Ukraine?
Well, listen, we're going to move a standalone Israel funding bill this week in the House. I know our colleagues, our Republican colleagues in the Senate have a similar measure. We believe that that is a pressing and urgent need. There are lots of things going on around the world that we have to address, and we will. But right now, what's happening in Israel takes the immediate attention, and I think we've got to separate that and get it through. I believe there'll be bipartisan support for that, and I'm going to push very hard for it.
Well, I mean, I don't know why you would push hard for that. It's not Israel is more pressing than Ukraine, or it's not. You can walk and chew gum. It's just 106 billion, right? Or you get to split it up. But the only reason you split it up is so you don't give to Ukraine. That's the only reason, right? Unless, like as some people have said, he's really going to try and get some maybe cultural compromises, in other bills or other kind of areas to try and get that in with Ukraine. But if you take what he's saying at face value, which is it's more pressing for Israel, as if like Ukraine suddenly isn't pressing. It may be more pressing, but it doesn't mean you had to split it into two. It's like, yeah, it's more pressing, let's get it all done now. It just really irritates me, this, but it is, I think, someone like Mike Johnson showing his true colours in being that kind of MAGA fringe Republican that just has a calm voice, and people think, oh, he's not that crazy. Well, actually, he's advocating all the same kind of things. So you know what my politics are anyway, and I'm never going to be a big fan of this guy. But this really annoys me because this isn't cool for Ukraine. This is not good for Ukraine. Right, Russia's No Limits partnership takes a big hit with China. That is, China has removed the Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu from the list as guest speaker at, well, what's this at? So Beijing Jingshan Forum, China's biggest annual show of military diplomacy, started on Sunday, but the name of the Russian Defense Minister, Sergei Shoigu, initially listed in the forum's agenda as the first guest speaker at tomorrow's opening ceremony, was not on the agenda. His slated appearance was originally thought to suggest China intends to give Russia, which invaded Ukraine in 2022, centre stage at the forum, but as of today, his name was not on the agenda, Reuters reported. China hopes to use the forum to promote Xi Jinping's vision for a safer world and draw developing countries closer as it faces increased coordination between the US and its allies to curtail its military ambitions. The US Defense Department has sent a delegation led by Xanthi Karas, China country director in the office for the Undersecretary of Defense. This year's forum takes place in an awkward time for China when it is without a defense minister whose main role is to engage with foreign militaries. On Tuesday, Beijing sacked Defense Minister Li Shangfu but did not name a replacement. Reuters reported last month that Li, who has been missing for 2 months, was being investigated for corruption. Some European countries, including France, plan to send a small delegation from their defense ministries, according to sources familiar with the matter. NATO's delegation will be led by Wendell Smith, its security policy director, a NATO official said. So that is interesting development there. Now, to return to the Israel-Gaza issue and how it affects Russia, here we have Sergei Sumleny, who is Eastern European expert, worked in Russia and Ukraine, being Netanyahu, kissing Putin's boots, placing advertising with Putin on your streets, wearing Putin's genocidal St. George's ribbon, making Russia's 9th of May a national holiday, denying Ukraine any military support, and for what? To see Jews being hunted by Russians. This is where I think there is an awful lot of previous policy that the Israelis have been involved in come back to haunt them. Especially given what's been taking place in the last 24 hours in Russia, take Dagestan with the anti-Semitic vibes going on there, to say the least. Here we have that Jewish centre I reported in my earlier video, under construction in Nalchik, being burned, and Jews now forbidden from entering public places and renting apartments. I think you're going to have Israel being very robust against Russia now, seeing all of this. This isn't going to go down well with them. However, they are somewhat diverted in attention at the moment, the Israelis. But there is an interesting dynamic between Ukraine, Israel, and Russia, that's for sure. And here we have, you should have zero doubt that Russia's intelligence operations organised and baited both sides to show up at the same place and time in Chicago yesterday. So what happened? Black Hebrew Israelites and pro-Palestinian protesters fought against each other. Now, this is right from, I don't know whether Russia were involved in this, but this is right from the Russian playbook. Okay, they foment discord on both sides of any spectrum in any country. They want to sow division. So you can imagine on the forums, they'll have the Internet Research Agency in St. Petersburg in Russia. You can imagine they've got the whole teams of people on forums on both sides of this argument, spreading divisive rhetoric and encouraging this kind of activity. Again, I don't know whether that's definitely the case, but as Igor Shushko here says, you should have zero doubt that Russia's intelligence operations organised and baited it. They're going to be involved. I would put quite a bit of money. They'll be involved in this somehow, even if it's just at the social media level. There you go. The US Senate Select Committee on Intelligence declassified reports on Russia's subversion activities in the US so the public would read them. Please read them. IRA is Prigozhin's Internet Research Agency, based in St. Petersburg, Russia. And there you go. It does happen. It has happened. There's evidence of this. I know people often get collusion confused with meddling, and the Russian collusion accusations about Trump that's a whole different subject than the Russian meddling in elections, which is much more insidious. It takes place in the information space, and there is plenty of evidence admitted by Facebook and Twitter, amongst other social media platforms, to suggest that that is exactly what has been happening. And Mark Hertling here, former Bradley commander, I think he was, but then went on to bigger things, just had a no-notice segment with Jim Acosta, I presume on CNN. Things are deteriorating. The events in Dagestan are just an indicator. To use a phrase I've used before, it's getting increasingly sporty throughout the Middle East, the Caucasus and the Stans. Things are going south. Things are not looking good in a number of these places around the world. And I guess people analysing the geopolitical landscape have their job cut out for them, including myself. There's going to be many places to keep an eye on going forward over the next few weeks, as we see the connections between Russia, Ukraine, Hamas, Israel, Gaza, Palestine, Dagestan and regions in the Caucasus and in the Eurasian areas. Just it's a right melting pot at the moment, global politics, and we're not living in a very good year at the moment, are we? And that's been the case for a couple of years. So anyway, that's enough from me. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Remember, if you do subscribe, press the button subscribe until you get the drop down menu and select all instead of personalized, and that means you get notifications of all of what I do, which is just videos and the occasional post to tell you where a video is. Anyway, thank you very much. Take care. Speak soon.